General. And I think what this speaks to is federal and state and local cooperation on dealing with one of the challenges that we face that is a national challenge, which is our work to go after drug trafficking, especially after the illegal trafficking of fentanyl, which is a priority for the President and the Vice President. I'm grateful to be here today also with Phoenix's DEA Local Enforcement Response Squad and the Phoenix Police Department. Working closely with our local law enforcement partners has put us in a position to go after not only the drug traffickers, but the illegal money that they earn from trafficking these drugs. This is a top priority for as I mentioned, for the President, and he's asked the Treasury Department to play a leading role. You usually wouldn't see a Treasury official talking about these issues, but what we know is that the trafficking of drugs is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And our goal at Treasury is to use the tools at the President's direction to go after that trafficking. And today's actions demonstrate what we're going to do to make sure that we go after the illegal money that these drug traffickers are earning. What makes these tragedies all the more heartbreaking and infuriating is that we know that these criminal trafficking organizations pursue profits with a callous disregard for American lives. President Biden asked the Treasury Department to use these tools, and what the Secretary did was order us to create a strike force at Treasury that includes various units from our IRS Criminal Investigations Unit to the working people at our Office of Foreign Asset Control and our Financial Network Criminal Investigations Unit to go after these drug traffickers and to bring them to make sure that they have no ability to use their funding and the money that they earn to further their criminal enterprises. Our ability to target the financial networks of these traffickers is effective because, in many respects, these deadly cartels operate like any other business. They need access to money. They want to transact in U.S. dollars. And they ultimately want to access the American financial system to launder their drug proceeds. By cutting them out of the U.S. financial system, we can effectively disrupt their ability to profit from these drug sales and take the money that they make from selling drugs to invest in their criminal enterprises. I'm here in Phoenix today to announce that we are sanctioning a major cartel, the Sinaloa cartel network, with 21 targets today, responsible for trafficking and targeting Arizona with the use of fentanyl and other U.S. states and abusing the U.S. financial system to launder their drug proceeds. This action builds on more than 65 targets against this cartel and 300 targets over the course of the last year going after drug traffickers throughout the country. Today's designations also highlight both the global and local scale of our efforts. In November, President Biden spent time talking to President Xi about the importance of us doing whatever we can to make sure that the precursors of fentanyl no longer come from China to Mexico and are turned into fentanyl. That work has led to collaboration with the Chinese government, where we have made very clear that we need to do everything we can to make sure that these chemicals no longer make it across the ocean to be able to get into the drugs that are coming across our border. In addition to the President's interactions with his Chinese counterpart, Secretary Yellen recently met with Mexican government officials to talk to them about what we can do together to ensure that illegal fentanyl is not getting into the United States. And part of the 21 sanctions we're putting in place today, in addition to our local coordination, we've coordinated closely with the Mexican government to make sure that these individuals don't have access to their illegally earned income. And today, we're able to thank our local partners in the DEA and also the DEA, both here in Phoenix, but also in Scottsdale. In addition to the designations we're announcing, we're pleased to be signing a memorandum of understanding with the Attorney General's office, which will mean that we can provide information from our Treasury Department to her office in order to make sure that we can work together better to target the illegal profits and money that these drug networks are making here in the state of Arizona, and to make sure that we're able to go after those people who perpetrate these crimes that are killing our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers, and affecting our families throughout this country. Disrupting the financing of fentanyl trafficking is one of the most important steps we can take to make sure that we're holding these cartels accountable here in the United States. As the President has said, we also need additional resources to make this effective. We continue to call on Congress to pass the administration's National Security Supplemental Budget request, which includes over $200 million to hire 1,000 additional CPB officers to stop illicit fentanyl from entering the United States, and $100 million for Homeland Security investigations to disrupt transnational criminal organizations and drug traffickers. As those in this room continue to take strides in curbing drug trafficking, it is critical that we have the resources needed to put an end to this destructive force in our communities. Fundamentally, our goal at the Treasury Department is to work closely with local, federal, and state officials to make sure that we do everything we can to cut off the flows of financing to these illegal groups, because we know that it is a way to help stop fentanyl from getting into our communities and impacting our families. Fundamentally, taking these steps is one of the several things that the administration is doing, but we know that we need additional help, and that's what we're calling on Congress to provide us so that we have the resources to stop fentanyl from entering our country. I want to again just thank our federal, local, and statewide partners, no more so than the Attorney General of this state, who has been a true partner to not only the Treasury Department, but to the federal government in going after these illegal actors. And I want to turn it over to her now for a few remarks.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Before I start, I want to sincerely thank Deputy Secretary Adeyemo for being here and for the work that the U.S. Treasury Department is doing to fight the drug cartels side by side with us. I also want to thank some of the true heroes who are here today, who are on the front lines of fighting the drug cartels. Sheriff Mark Daniels in the back here. Colonel Jeffrey Glover, I think, is in the back from DPS. And Sherry Oz, the special agent in charge for the DEA here in Arizona. They are doing amazing work. I want to thank U.S. Attorney Gary Restaino for his ongoing partnership and collaboration between his office and the Attorney General's office. Our strong partnership means a great deal, and thank you, Mayor Gallego, for your partnership. Our work with local law enforcement agencies like the Phoenix Police Department and others, the Tempe Police Department, are critical to our efforts. Listen, Arizona has been flooded with cheap and deadly fentanyl in recent years, with over half of the fentanyl seized in the United States being seized in Arizona in 2022 and 2023. Let me repeat that. Half of all the fentanyl seized in the United States was seized right here in Arizona in recent years. The cartels use our ports of entry as their own personal postal service to send fentanyl to the rest of the nation. This devastating public health crisis has wrecked communities, harmed families, and pushed drug overdose deaths in Arizona to astronomical highs. Fentanyl overdoses are the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. And cartels are even targeting Arizona teenagers on social media with these cheap and deadly pills, and Arizona is seeing fentanyl overdoses in children as young as 14 years old. The Arizona Attorney General's office works closely with our federal and local partners to fight this crisis day in and day out, and we have seen an alarming rise in the amount of fentanyl seized, as I mentioned, in Arizona in recent years. In fiscal year 2022, 34 million fentanyl pills were seized in Arizona. In the first quarter of 2023, nearly as many pills were seized. About 80% of the prior year's numbers were seized in just 3 months. And as was just mentioned, fentanyl is a big business for the cartels, including the Sinaloa cartel, and that is why we are going after their financial operations and why it's such a critical part of the fight against these criminal syndicates. I want to also just take a moment and mention that we have folks here from our TRACK program. Arizona actually pioneered the effort to track money and as it's being wired from Arizona back to Mexico, we continue in those efforts. We will continue in those efforts to find out how they're sending their money and to try to stop it. And, through shared intelligence, resources, and strategic operations, we can target the cartel's infrastructure within our borders and beyond, as today's announcements show. So again, I want to thank the Treasury Department, the IRS, and the DEA, all of our federal partners, as well as our state, local law enforcement agencies for their work in fighting this crisis. And I want to take a moment and say this. I truly hope that this is the first in many steps that the federal government takes in helping us retake the border from the Mexican cartels. We need help. Our sheriffs need help. We need more attention by the federal government on the Arizona border. There is no doubt about that. And so that's why I recently went to the border with Representative Gallego to talk about the fact that the Biden administration had passed funding or had approved funding for X-ray scanners at our ports of entry, and yet Congress has done nothing to implement that machinery, those X-ray scanners. We need the federal government to be doing more to help our local law enforcement partners on the border. Every action that we take to fight these criminal syndicates flooding our communities with poisonous drugs, whether it's implementing sanctions like those announced today, seizing illicit pills, or arresting drug traffickers, is worthwhile, and we will not stop until we have dismantled these networks and restored safety and health to our communities. So thank you very much. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Attorney General Mayes. I'm Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego. It is wonderful to welcome the Deputy Secretary to Phoenix and to be here today with our U.S. Attorney who works so hard on these issues. This is a huge crisis for us. We are losing so many of our Phoenix residents, and each one is tragic. We have lost multiple toddlers to fentanyl. I can't imagine what it's like to be a parent who knows that if you'd just been more careful, your child would be alive. But it's not just those families who are impacted. Our first responders have to go to these scenes. They are often parents themselves, and just seeing a little baby who ingested fentanyl and lost his life is one of the worst possible days at work, and so much heartbreak. In 2023, we saw 1,000 overdose deaths just in the city of Phoenix. Empty seats at tables, kids taken too young. There's a huge array of factors that contribute, from pain management to peer pressure, stress, mental health issues, and trauma that can lead to these areas. And we are so appreciative of what the Deputy Secretary has announced today. We have, in the city of Phoenix, have gotten so much support from the Biden administration. We have been offered partnerships from Homeland Security to Department of Justice, Department of State. But I think the Department of Treasury might be the one that is so key, just in getting the money and cutting off the supplies. These are sophisticated business organizations, and what the Treasury Department has done to restrict the money supplies to the Sinaloa cartel is so important to us. Over the last 5 years, we have seen seizures of fentanyl pills up 15,000%, from 300,000 to 4.5 million. It's staggering to go from 300,000 to 4.5 million pills. The Phoenix Police Department has been doing excellent work. The seizures are enormous, but we need to cut the cartels off higher on the supply chain, and the Deputy Secretary's announcement today will be very important to that. If we look month to month in the city of Phoenix in terms of our drug seizures, it's between 65% and 90% of all narcotic drug arrests in the city of Phoenix. It's taking a toll on our community. from kids in school to the staggering prevalence in our community of people who are experiencing homelessness. It is so cheap. You can get fentanyl at a lower cost than a bottle of water in the city of Phoenix, and it is much more deadly and extremely addictive. We are grateful for the federal support, but as the Attorney General says, we need to do more. I am appreciative that the congressional delegation funded new technology, but the fact that it is sitting there waiting for the appropriation to install it is deeply disappointing. So I'm hopeful that Speaker Johnson and Congress will move on that. We did have good news from Washington, D.C. this week. The President signed into law our U.S. Senator Kelly's End Fentanyl Act, and that will also be helpful in moving forward on this. So I'm thankful to the Biden-Harris administration for the additional steps on the trafficking of illicit fentanyl. The Sinaloa cartel is one of the most notorious drug trafficking organizations in the world and is responsible for such a significant portion of the illicit fentanyl coming into the United States and into Arizona specifically. Today's announcement to sanction affiliated operatives and businesses is an important and welcome action that represents how united we stand, elected officials, law enforcement agencies across all levels of government in the face of crisis. I'm committed to working to move this forward and continue the progress, and I thank the administration for doing what they can to leverage unique tools to target those bad actors who profit from deadly fentanyl sales that are harming our most vulnerable. I will next introduce one of our great partners in this area, our U.S. Attorney.
Thank you, Mayor Gallego, and good morning to all of you. I'm Gary Restaino. I'm the United States Attorney here in the District of Arizona, responsible for federal prosecutions throughout Arizona. Very much appreciate the opportunity to speak to you here today, along with Deputy Secretary Adeyemo, of course, Mayor Gallego, and Attorney General Mayes. Department of Justice investigations here in Arizona have paved the way for some of the critical OFAC sanctions on the Sinaloa cartel. For starters, today's OFAC sanctions against leaders of a money laundering organization have a strong Arizona nexus. This is a sophisticated trade-based money laundering scheme involving the bulk purchase and export of cell phones, and that was investigated here in Arizona by DEA agents with Special Agent in Charge Sherry Oz's group, along with assistant United States attorneys, and consolidated last year for prosecution with an existing case in New York. I say this because this is a whole-of-government approach to the fentanyl crisis. I was pleased to receive a call last April from DEA Administrator Ann Milgram praising the essential work of our team here in Arizona in disrupting and dismantling cartel activities. Here's another recent case prosecuted by assistant U.S. attorneys in Arizona in coordination with agents from DEA and Homeland Security investigations. In December of 2023, the Treasury Department and DOJ coordinated both the unsealing of a federal indictment and the parallel imposition of OFAC sanctions on the Malas Mañas organization and its leaders who operate in Sonora with the permission of the Sinaloa cartel. This Malas Mañas organization, as alleged in the grand jury's indictment, smuggles aliens and drugs into the United States, multitasking on crime, and launders the criminal proceeds back into Mexico. It's cases like these that are critical for us in our efforts to bolster and safeguard border communities. So these cases demonstrate two key points in our efforts against the cartels bringing this poison into America. First, we're all in this together, and we're pretty good at cooperating here in Arizona. Within the federal government, the Treasury sanctions provide an important additional deterrent to the DOJ prosecutions. And from a federal-state perspective, I got to tell you, our law enforcement partners are extraordinarily collaborative. The Office of National Drug Control Policy, through the Arizona High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, funds a substantial amount, tens of millions of dollars, of state and county task force work along and adjacent to the border. Local police officers from departments like Phoenix and Scottsdale participate. Federal agents actively support these initiatives and investigations, and that includes not just the DEA agents, but also our host here today, Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigations, a great force multiplier in any type of investigation into cartel activities. The funding also includes federal money to pay for state and county prosecutors. there's more than enough work to go around, and we're energized by the collegiality and teamwork in the state and pleased to be able to provide these federal resources to it. Now, I say and talk about the federal resources to make sure everyone understands the federal support, but also to see how can we do better, and we certainly encourage all of our partners to pursue competitive grant opportunities so that as Arizona, we punch above our weight in getting competitive grants from the federal government. Finally, although our focus is very much on the Sinaloa cartel and its leadership in Mexico, we're also cognizant and concerned about the individuals who traffic fentanyl into the United States. It's not undocumented aliens concealing fentanyl through ports of entry. It's United States citizens and legal permanent residents, many of them younger adults. They're taking the cartel's dirty money, and we need continued education efforts for them about the risks of that dangerous choice. Thank you.
So I think the message here from all of us to these cartel leaders is that we are willing to use every tool at our disposal to go after your money, to cut you off from your resources, to make it hard for you to sell your poison in the United States, and that we're going to do that at federal, state, and local levels. We're grateful for the partnership from law enforcement, and we know that we need more resources, and that's exactly what the President has called for. I know that at this point we're going to take your questions, and I'll hand it over to my colleague.
Good morning, sir. I'm Stacy Barchinger. I'm with the Arizona Republic here in Phoenix. You had mentioned, I believe it was 65, prior sanctions against the Sinaloa cartel. I wonder if you have any numbers or other evidence about how those sanctions have affected the cartel so far.
So what it's done is it's cut them off for millions of dollars of their money. Ultimately, as the Attorney Generals and others have said, these cartels are sophisticated business enterprises, and the leaders of those organizations, the things that they are interested in is making money. And making sure that they can't make that money is stopping them from both being able to profit from the deaths they're causing here in the United States, but also to have money to reinvest in their businesses to make them more sophisticated. So our goal here is to work closely with local officials and with the Attorney General and with the U.S. Attorney to learn more about their networks, to learn more about how their financial resources are, and to use our tools at Treasury to track down their financial resources and cut them off so that these sophisticated business organizations starve from not having capital to reinvest in their businesses, and two, are unable to pay the hundreds and thousands of people who are part of their networks and fundamentally starve them of the resources they need to continue selling these illegal drugs in the United States. But I think I want to press on something that everyone also said, which is that we need more resources. Local law enforcement, state law enforcement need more resources, and that's exactly what the President's proposed to Congress, and congressional action will mean that we have the ability to stop these drugs at the border before they come into places like Arizona and they affect the lives of too many Americans.
I'm wondering if you could speak to the ways in which the cartels are plugging into the U.S. financial system. We've heard some examples of cases that have been prosecuted. Can you elaborate on that?
These cartels are sophisticated money laundering organizations as well, and you think about this case in particular. They were building up, while the cost of fentanyl is relatively cheap, this is a volume business for them, and they're earning millions of dollars from selling fentanyl in the country. The challenge for them, of course, is getting that money across the border. So instead of sending dollars across the border, they were buying cell phones and sending those cell phones across and then turning those into pesos. Ultimately, part of the way that we're catching this is by looking at the information through banking transactions and transactions with money service businesses throughout the country, and providing that information to law enforcement officials on the ground who are also tracking these criminals, and then building out a web that allows us to understand what's happening here. And then as we have that web, using our sanctions to go after those individuals in order to make sure that that money can't move. But what we know is that they are very sophisticated. They know that we're watching them. But the goal for us is that if we work together with local and federal officials, we know that we have the ability to do this. And one other partner that's been critical to this has been the financial services sector. Fundamentally, banks, money services businesses, them being willing to help us better understand the trends that they're seeing, suspicious activities they're seeing, reporting that to the Treasury Department's FinCEN unit, provides us with information we can then share now that we've redoubled on this MOU with the Attorney General's office here, as well as with our federal law enforcement officials who are looking at these criminals on the ground. So our goal is going to be to make sure that we redouble these efforts, and after this press conference, we're going to have a roundtable with those partners, both with law enforcement, but also in the financial sector, to think about what else we can do together.
How much money are we talking about, and how much has been seized?
This is a multi-billion-dollar business, drug trafficking in the United States, and part of our goal at Treasury is to freeze the money, because there's the other step, and I know that our law enforcement partners are working on seizing the money, but if your money's freezed and you can't use it, it's as good as gone for you. And our goal is to make sure that we can freeze as much of that money as possible, because fundamentally these cartels, they have huge payrolls. They have huge amounts of money they need to pay to keep their infrastructure going. And if we make it hard for them to get access to those funds, it makes it harder for them to run their businesses and puts us in a better position to use the work that our law enforcement partners are doing to go after them and criminally indict people, and to make it harder for them to function, not just in the United States, but around the world.
Sir, I'm sorry, I might not be understanding how you sanction an organization like the cartel. It sounds like do you freeze any of their money that they may put in a bank account, or can you just help me understand?
Yes, and this is something we do in cases. It's the same tool we're using when it comes to holding Russia accountable that we're using here, which is fundamentally for these cartels. They, like any other business, want to transact in U.S. dollars. They want to transact through banks. They have so much cash that they need to go through the financial system in some way, be it a money services business or through a financial institution. By sanctioning them, what we're saying is that U.S. financial institutions that have any resources that are tied to these individuals or to these organizations need to now freeze those assets. These individuals, these businesses, no longer have the ability to do business in the United States of America. They don't have the ability to do business in dollars. And what we've found in the past is when the U.S. government sanctions these individuals, banks around the world cut them off as well, because fundamentally, if I'm a bank in Mexico or a bank in China, I don't want to ultimately be subject to sanctions from the U.S. government, so I'm not going to do business with these individuals. So in lots of ways, what we're doing today is that we are putting out an alert to the global financial system that these individuals, these businesses, are not to be done business with going forward, and making it harder for them to move their money around globally.
This may be one more for the Attorney General or the U.S. Attorney, but you'd mentioned that they're using our legal ports of entry to move these drugs. We've seen state lawmakers here in Arizona trying to pass legislation limiting those crossings outside of those ports of entry for the fentanyl trade. I was wondering if you can give any context to where law enforcement is seeing the most trafficking going on. Is it at those ports or is it outside of those ports?
I think it's both. Candidly, I agree with some of those lawmakers who say that it's outside. It's not just in through the ports of entry. I think, probably half, maybe a little bit more than half goes through the ports. That's why it's so critical that we get that X-ray technology into the ports. It is a travesty that Congress has failed to appropriate the money we need to get those scanners at the ports, but it's also coming across the border on foot, the fentanyl itself. And when you talk to Border Patrol, when you talk to sheriffs, they will tell you that is happening, and it's happening in part because of the migration crisis that we have. Border Patrol is so busy dealing with the migration crisis and the fact that they've got to process so many people who are coming across the border that they're not able to address the fentanyl coming across the border. And so it frankly is both. This is a multi-pronged approach that we have to take to fight fentanyl. And part of it is getting our border under control. Because when we do that, our Border Patrol agents can then focus on stopping the fentanyl before it gets into the United States, whether that is on foot or whether that's through the ports or whether that's through drones. We literally have drug cartels who are dropping fentanyl into Arizona, sometimes upwards of 30 miles into Arizona by drones. That has to stop. And if the federal government can't get it under control, then I personally believe that they ought to delegate that authority to sheriffs. But I think what is so important about what the Deputy Secretary is talking about today is that it goes after if you can get a hold of and stop the money supply and stop their ability to pay to get the money out of the United States, then you really can have an impact. We were working on this as well through trying to track wire transfers out of money service businesses. And by the way, when we talk about money service businesses, we're talking about entities like Western Union. Those are the kinds of entities that we're talking about that are that had been and in some cases still are facilitating the transfer of drug proceeds back to the cartels. And so we need all of this cooperation to be able to track the money supply.
If I can jump in on that one as well from a federal perspective. So yeah, it's more than half coming through the ports of entry. It's the lion's share, but then a not insignificant amount that we just don't know and can be coming across the border otherwise. We in my office are not seeing backpackers like we used to see with marijuana. It's not like there's a steady stream of backpackers of fentanyl coming across looking at the prosecution statistics. But we certainly understand that there are some. We also have seen some limited use of drone activity as well. So it's the lion's share at the ports of entry, and we got to figure out the southbound and northbound inspections there. What we could also use for drugs that are coming across not through a legal port of entry is checkpoints. The Border Patrol simply needs more resources to have all the checkpoints operational. These are immigration checkpoints, but they serve an important secondary function for drugs, and there's about 11 of them in the Tucson sector. If all of those were operational more of the time, we would do a stronger job of interdiction, and that gets back into the resource needs there as well. But really, the idea of the southbound and northbound interdictions at the port of entry really is a critical need from a resource perspective, and there's lots of good technology out there that we need to make sure that we're implementing.
If I could just add one more thing to that, and I think it's important because we have a couple of sheriffs here today. I understand, we have a looming situation, and Sheriff Daniels, tell me if I'm wrong about this, in which funding for nonprofits who are right now dealing with street releases is about to come to an end in Arizona, and I think that's at the end of the month. And we need the federal government to step up and help us deal with this, because we have a looming humanitarian crisis that our border communities are about to face, associated with the migration crisis that we have. So I would, call upon the federal government today to help us address that, to help our border sheriffs who are on the front lines of this and are about to see that in a few weeks.
Just to follow up on your previous comment about the federal government that can't handle it, giving it to the sheriffs, you're speaking specifically to drug interdiction?
Look, I understand that this is potentially a controversial position for me to take, but in certain circumstances, especially where you have drones dropping fentanyl off at the inside the state of Arizona, and if the federal government cannot handle it, then I think that sheriffs and other potentially local law enforcement should be delegated that responsibility by the federal government. This is not totally uncontroversial when you think about other areas where the federal government delegates to state agencies. As you guys know, I'm a former Arizona Corporation Commissioner. The federal government delegated to the Corporation Commission the authority to address pipeline safety and railroad safety inside Arizona. Now, do I think what I just talked about is optimal? No, I think the federal government should handle this. It is the federal government's responsibility to get the border under control. It is the federal government's responsibility to prevent this fentanyl from pouring into Arizona. And as we can see, the federal government is stepping up to try to stop the money supply. But our sheriffs are dealing with a crisis day by day, and we have a Congress that won't even fund the money necessary to implement scanners at the border. So we're literally starting to think inside my office, what can we do to get those scanners implemented? We need more DEA agents in Arizona. We need a lot more DEA agents in Arizona. I have been told by some that New York State has more DEA agents than we do. Why? How is that even remotely appropriate, given that we are on the front lines of this crisis? So I'm not, I think there are certain areas where if the federal government cannot get its act together and protect our state and protect our people, then they should consider delegating with appropriate oversight some of those responsibilities.
Attorney General, what do you think of bills like the one advancing in Arizona that would give local law enforcement, it would create state crimes so that they could combat issues at the border?
Yeah, I don't know if I would go that far. I think I would do it in a different way. I mean, I think there are ways, again, that the federal government can specifically delegate to a sheriff like Sheriff Daniels the ability to tackle some of these issues. Like, for instance, when we're talking about drones that are reaching as far into Arizona as Greenlee County. I mean, 30 miles into Arizona. 30 miles into Arizona. And if a drone has reached 30 miles into Arizona, then I think local law enforcement should have the authority to take it down. Either through disabling it, we have technology that can disable it remotely, or through munitions.
So I know our time is short, but I think what you're hearing here from local and state officials is something that the president agrees with, which is that we need Congress to act. We need Congress to give us the resources to make sure that we can do what is needed on the border. And the border package the president has endorsed is a bipartisan package. It's one that is backed by the border agents who are at the border asking for more resources. It's backed by the Chamber of Commerce. It's backed by common sense Americans, including the people standing behind me, because fundamentally what we need is additional resources to make sure that we can secure the border, deal with migration, but also make sure that illegal fentanyl is not coming across the border. And we expect Congress to do what needs to happen in order to put that legislation through Congress and get it passed. But until that happens, our goal here, working closely with local and state officials, is to use all the tools at our disposal to deal with fentanyl. And we're going to use those aggressively and comprehensively to cut off their access to the money that they need to keep their operations going. And we're going to work in collaboration with local sheriffs and also with officials at the federal government to make sure that all of our resources are brought to bear on a challenge that affects every American family. We don't want to see the loss of life tied to fentanyl. We don't want to be in a position where these criminal organizations have the ability to get their deadly product across the border, and we are going to act in any way that we can to make sure that doesn't happen. So thank you all for your time. Very much appreciate it.
So we'll now move into the roundtable, and press can hang around for the first minute or two in full spring.